Hi, this is Peter Case. You're listening to the Your Morning Coffee podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart. Weekly music news for the new music business.
From our good friend Will Page, music smashes box office records. Global value of music copyright soars to $45.5 billion, now worth more than cinema.
From Hypebot, how to identify botted playlists and protect your music.
And from Paste, as musicians hit financial rock bottom, Kate Nash shows hers. Well, we talk kind of a lot about stuff like that, but and in fact, we're going to do more about that apparently today. So glad you are here. Jay and I are going to start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Well, it is good to see you, Jay, on a lovely, for us, Saturday morning here in Southern California.
Yeah, a little holiday weekend. We had Thanksgiving, which was nice. We had Record Store Day on Friday. Went to see our friends at Salzer's, which was pretty fun. Did you have a nice holiday?
It was lovely, and I am still full from my ever so large Thanksgiving dinner, but it is good to be back and good to kind of walk around and start jumping into the stories. There's a lot of great stuff to talk about.
Yeah, the first one in sort of these intro stories, from Music Business Worldwide, there was a headline, Download MBW's new How to Write a Hit book, supported by BMI, featuring the wisdom of 50 of the world's greatest songwriters. And when I first saw this, I thought, what is this all about? And then I sort of started reading through it, and it's really cool. It's got, I think there's, how many are there? Like 50 of them. And it's Jack Antonoff, from Taylor Swift, and Glenn Ballard and Desmond Child, Holly Knight, Dan Wilson, many others. But it's sort of, their wisdom for songwriters.
Their wisdom. So How to Write a Hit is a guide for brilliance in music creativity. Published by Music Business Worldwide and supported by BMI, this bookazine collates advice and tips from 50 of the best songwriters in the world. Indeed, the book celebrates the 50th interview in Music Business Worldwide's long-running World's Greatest Songwriters interview series, which is excellent, by the way. The amount of Grammys and billion-stream tracks these guys have racked up will spin your head. Now they're here to tell you about how they did it.
Yeah, you can download that for free from them or from your morning coffee. It's all in there, Music Business Worldwide. There was a story from Billboard about NVIDIA, and if you've been following the news, NVIDIA is just a beast, one of the most successful companies ever. And the headline was, NVIDIA jumps into AI music space with new audio generator Fugato. So NVIDIA, the computer chip giant, has entered the AI music race by announcing this new model, Fugato, last Tuesday. The company calls it short for Foundational Generative Audio Transformer Opus One. It's a quote-unquote Swiss Army knife for sound.
So using text or audio prompts, Fugato can generate new music at the click of a button and edit existing audio, including removing or adding instruments from a song or changing the accent and emotion in a voice in just seconds.
With Fugato, NVIDIA aims to take on today's top AI music models, including Suno, Udio, and many more. Though it's a late entrant into the game to create the best music AI model, Fugato appears to have crisp audio quality and a number of capabilities that could change the music-making process for producers and for composers.
Well, that's going to be a fun one to mess around with. So I'm going to try to see what I can do with that one. An interesting story from Billboard. UMG hits back at Limp Bizkit's $200 million lawsuit, calls hidden royalty accusations fiction. And you and I talked about this. And when this came out, we both were kind of looking at each other going, this doesn't really pass the smell test. It just doesn't seem right.
Right.
So the Blockbuster lawsuit filed last month in Los Angeles federal court claimed that Durst had not seen a dime in royalties over the decades, and that hundreds of other artists may have been treated similarly under systemic and fraudulent policies.
Yeah, but we saw this coming. UMG's first response was Friday. Attorneys for the label said the lawsuit must be dismissed immediately because it's based on a fallacy. The key problem with Fred Durst's claims, according to UMG's attorneys, is that documents included in his own lawsuit eviscerate his allegations. They specifically cite emails in which UMG executives appear to have reached out to get royalties flowing, but were rebuffed by the band's own business manager. And you and I sort of talked about that, on an episode, that it didn't seem right, that why would Universal withhold royalties and try to screw these guys over? It didn't really make sense. And I think you mentioned, there's probably something less nefarious here. And they did have this separate sort of business management company. And so the plot thickens.
There's a lot of weirdness there, exactly.
Yeah.
Another article from Paste. As musicians hit financial rock bottom, artist Kate Nash shows hers. From Caroline Polachek to Little Sims, artists have railed against the rising cost of touring since the pandemic. English singer-songwriter Kate Nash started an OnlyFans in order to produce a safe, high-quality tour while also shining a light on the industry's failure to support musicians.
Right. Musicians are expected to put out works of art that have taken years to create, all so that we can listen to them for free or cheap, on vampiric corporate streaming platforms, as they put it. And then they're supposed to go on tour, which is prohibitively expensive, and especially since the pandemic, touring costs have skyrocketed by about 40% since lockdown. As USC music business professor and Warped Tour founder Kevin Lyman told KCRW earlier this year, for anyone who's not a megastar like Taylor Swift, going on tour can often result in losses.
Right. So Kate Nash wasn't having any of it. The English singer-songwriter is currently playing in the UK and Europe to celebrate 9 Sad Symphonies. That's an album. But in light of the astronomical costs required for a high-quality show in terms of production value, safety, and proper crew compensation, she announced last week that she's starting an OnlyFans account, dubbing the move Butts for Tour Buses. And she's hardly the only notable artist on the platform. You may recall we talked about Lily Allen is selling her feet pictures on OnlyFans.
Right. So now they're selling pictures of their bums. Regarding her decision to start an OnlyFans, Nash explains, "It's an amazing feeling. I feel really empowered. I've been able to hire a member of a crew I wasn't able to bring to Europe, which is changing someone's life and making my show better. And it means I'm able to carry on touring a high quality show, ethically. I'm just kind of like, where can my arse take me next? What can I reinvent back into? How much art am I going to be able to make with my bum?" Which is a British expression for butt.
That's it is. And it's questions we all ask, isn't it, Jay, for crying out loud? And how about we thank some of our sponsors? We are so lucky to have some of the hardest working people help us put the show together.
Yeah.
We can't thank them enough.
We sure do. We have some great sponsors, starting with the Mechanical Licensing Collective, the MLC. It's a nonprofit organization, and it's making a big difference for songwriters, music publishers, and other rights holders by transforming how they receive mechanical streaming royalties from services like Spotify and Apple Music in the U.S. Every month, the MLC collects the streaming data and royalties from those platforms. It matches the money to the creator who earned it, and then they pay them or their publishers and admin partners the royalties that they're due. To date, the MLC has already distributed over $2.5 billion in total royalties and has nearly 50,000 members worldwide. If you're a songwriter, composer, or a lyricist with music streaming, or a publisher or administrator, you need to become a member of the MLC to ensure that you're not leaving any money on the table. Best of all, membership is completely free, and the MLC pays out 100% of the royalties it receives. Visit themlc.com to learn more.
Indeed. We are also sponsored in part by Soundtrack, music for business. The good news is that 33% of consumers discover new music they hear played in businesses such as restaurants, retail establishment, bars, hotels, etc. The bad news, that over 70% of U.S. small and mid-sized businesses are misusing music, resulting in a loss to music creators, rights holders, and the music industry to the tune of over $1.3 billion per year in the U.S. alone. Soundtrack is the leading music streaming service for business, providing music to more than 80,000 businesses globally. To learn more, you can jump over to soundtrack.app/artist-guide. We do thank both of them. Well, let's jump into the stories, Jay. It's from our friend Will Page. Music smashes box office records. Global value of music copyright soars to $45.5 billion. Now worth more than cinema, or as we would say here, worth more than the movie business.
Right.
So whether you're investing, operating, or earning from music copyright, you ought to know how much it's all worth and how each piece of the puzzle is trending.
This is one of those Will Page reports. It's just beautifully laid out, so you can visually see what he's talking about. So I highly encourage you to check out the article in your morning coffee, the lead story this week. Will writes that, that's the purpose of this annual calculation, which now receives the collaborative support of the big three international music trade bodies, IFPI, SISAC, and the International Confederation of Music Publishers, who have initiated their own ambitious exercise in valuing the publishing sector and will report later this year on that.
Right. So, Will asks, why bother with this exercise, particularly when we already have the IFPI Global Music Report? Well, copyright creates many more rights and revenue streams, such as mechanical and performing rights, to name but two. This report fills in those gaps and strips out the double counting to show us where we're at and lay the foundation for follow-on analysis. Anyone trying to capture the attention of, let's say, policymakers who don't grasp the threat posed by AI, for example, may find it handy to have a big number showing what's at stake. In music, this is the biggest number there is.
That's right. Will writes, this is the big number. The global value of copyright in calendar year 2023 reached $45.5 billion. That's double-digit growth, 11% year on year, and a jaw-dropping 26% up since the pandemic-riddled 2021. That's when he first calculated this figure 9 years ago. In 2014, the figure was just $25 billion. Next year, when he calculates 2024, he says we may see copyright having doubled within a decade. Make no mistake, it's boom time.
Right. So starting with this one, copyright's 2023 stack is composed of $28.5 billion in recorded revenues, almost $13 billion in collective management organization, that's CMO collections, and a little over $4 billion in direct publisher income. Labels grew at the fastest annual rate, about 12%, followed closely by CMOs at 11%. And lastly, publisher direct income at 4%. As his chart shows, CMOs have seen their collections bounce back from the pandemic, hit 2021 by almost 40%, but this year's slowdown to 11% suggests collections are returning to a steady growth pattern.
And then Will asks, is that a fair division? One unique property of this annual exercise is that it shows how the $45.5 billion, how that pie gets allocated, with 63% now going to artists and labels and 37% going to songwriters, publishers, and their CMOs. While the pie got bigger, the shares are identical to what was reported last year. So digging into the details, label income, that growth of 12% was driven mainly by streaming, up 10.4%. But physical is no longer a rounding error. It actually outpaced streaming growth in percentage terms, 13.4%, with vinyl in particular rising 15.4%.
And I say this every time, but it's like, it still blows me away. What else can you say about vinyl? It just continues to rock. He says there's no sign of a slowdown either. In the U.S. alone, vinyl will gross labels $1 billion by the end of 2024. He says demand for vinyl has always been constrained by supply, but the emergence of global players, mainly based in Europe, like the company Record Industry, which is in the Netherlands, GZ, which is in the Czech Republic, and Pressing Business over in Poland, are helping to remove bottlenecks by increasing capacity and reducing red tape by streamlining global shipments. Globally, vinyl will soon overtake CDs. A real sign of the format times, Jay.
Yeah, and if you were around Record Store Day on Friday, you saw that there was no shortage of fans ready to purchase vinyl, new and used. They talk about collective management organizations, or CMOs. What is a CMO, you ask? Well, unlike a PRO, which they track and collect performance royalties, CMOs collect both performance and mechanical royalties. So in the music industry, CMOs administer the rights of rights holders for the use of their musical works and sound recordings. There are CMOs that represent songwriters and music publishers, and those that represent performers, record labels, or both. CMOs are territory specific, and countries may have one or a number of CMOs for creators in those countries to choose from.
Well, so regarding the CMOs and publishers, there are three structural changes that have reached a tipping point. Number one is the value to CMOs of live performance now exceeds that of general licensing for public performance. Songs sung on stage are now generating more royalties than those wallpapering the background of high streets and hotels, Jay.
That's surprising. Number two, the value to CMOs of their digital collections exceeds that of broadcast and radio, the traditional breadwinner, and the gap is widening. For context, a decade ago, digital made up around 5% of collections, while broadcast made up half.
Right, and number three, publishers are collecting more from the digital market through all forms of direct licensing than they receive from CMOs. Lots more. Indeed, the majority of publishers' digital income circumvents the regulatory complexities of CMOs.
Yeah, and Will goes on to write that from an outsider looking in, one counterintuitive point warrants closer examination. In the summer of 2024, Luminate reported 15.1% growth in the volume of global audio streams, yet Universal Music Group's stock got whacked when analysts interpreted signals to mean just 4% growth in the value of those streams. And last week, we covered this great piece by Glenn Peoples from his newsletter, The Ledger, about that some of these majors are actually doing pretty well. They're overperforming, but they're not quite meeting expectations, so their stocks are getting whacked.
Exactly. So Will asks, why the divergence? He says the answer is the lopsided nature of that growth explosive volumes of free streams in the emerging regions of the South, yet a deep concentration of value of paid streams in the established regions of the North.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And he talks about glocalization. And he wrote an article about that, Will Page did, and you and I covered that. And if you haven't read it, Google, look at like the word localization, but this is with a G, glocalization. He says that time flies. At the start of last year, we didn't know what the tongue twister term glocalization meant. Now, thanks to a paper co-authored, with Chris Dalla Riva from the London School of Economics European Institute, it's part of the media industry's global conversation today.
Sure. And I can't even say it. Glocalization captures the phenomenon of many local artists topping their local charts on global streaming platforms and doing so in their mother tongue. Contrary to what theory would have predicted, the world isn't flat after all, Will says. He says, we'll close out this year's report by illustrating how this phenomenon matters to the global value of copyright in terms of trade, exports, and culture.
Yeah, Will stresses that global trade matters, right? Economists often argue, and counter-argue, of course, that free trade between countries helps the poor catch up to the rich because it opens new markets, enables specialisms, and allows countries to become self-sufficient. The jury will forever be out on whether that actually happens. Still, we can use Luminate's artist origin classifications to explore what trade looks like for music.
Right. So he goes on to say almost a third of all streams inside America are non-American artists, suggesting globalization is happening within the country's multicultural borders. Unsurprisingly, the British invasion of yesteryear continues to make it the biggest exporter into the U.S. More surprisingly is who's second? Mexico, recently overtaking Canada. Looking further down the list of music exporting countries getting heard inside the U.S., you'll see another surprise. The country of Colombia is ranked 6th.
He says that, when relatively poor countries like Mexico and Colombia, when they export music to the richer United States, we can calculate the trade impact of these rich country royalties flowing back to poorer countries.
Right. So Will says exports matter. Switching lanes from artists to songwriters, historically there have been 3 net exporters of music. So there's the U.S., the U.K., and Sweden. These countries brought in more money in from the exploitation of their songwriters' rights internationally than they sent out for domestic exploitation of foreign songwriters. Now there's a 4th. That's right, South Korea.
Yeah, we're talking K-pop, right? And he also says that YouTube matters. Another way to think about music exports is to look at the geographic trends of channel subscribers on YouTube. Think about it this way. The rest of the world peering into your country's artist base more than your own fans peering out?
He says our 4th net exporter, we mentioned South Korea, now has 17 times the number of overseas subscribers peering into its K-pop market than Korean subscribers of international artists. Indeed, 4 Korean artists, Blackpink, BTS, August D, and Psy, each have more subscribers on YouTube than their own country has people. Wow.
Wow. Will asks, should our global figure be even bigger? In this year's total, 45.5 billion, we now have a figure that's closer to 50 than 40, and that's nuts. It's also a prudent figure that it likely underestimates copyright's true value.
Well, media estimates global recorded music revenue in 2023 to be $30.5 billion. That's 6% higher than the IFPI. Similarly, for publishing, they put the figure around $10 billion, $1 billion more than music and copyright. Why the discrepancy, and which should we trust? In a thoughtful piece, our friend Glenn Peoples argues that neither global revenue figure is right or wrong. They're just different, and points to MIDI's inclusion of the DIY sector and production music in theirs.
Right. These discrepancies do, however, leave one sore point lingering above all of this work. Global needs to mean global. The United Nations recognizes 193 countries, whereas the IFPI yearbook reports on just 56.
Right. So worse, MENA, which is the Middle East and North African regions, get grouped together despite distinct market characteristics. Similarly, CSAC's Global Collection Report isn't global either. Shane Shapiro of the Center for Music Ecosystems calculates that over 40 countries don't even have their own CMO. Wow.
Right. And the last thing he says in this wonderful piece, and again, we're just giving you highlights of it. You really need to check out the lead story in your morning coffee this last week. If the industry can up its measurement game, there's a double tailwind that'll drive the global value of copyright even higher. First, re-emerging markets will catch up with rich ones. And second, as they do, they'll get more measurement attention. more value, and more of it being tracked. So buckle up. This business is changing as fast as it's growing. Great piece by Will Page.
Jay, let's again thanks to our sponsors that help put the show on the road for us.
Yeah, we are sponsored by Music.ai. Music.ai is a trailblazing AI-powered music and audio platform offering an expansive suite of over 50 stackable AI audio solutions. If you want to change the tempo or pitch of your song, adjust instruments, vocals, mute background noise, Music.ai makes all of that super easy. It's embraced by record labels, agencies, tech firms, and developers. Music.ai is synonymous with audio innovation. With over 45 million users, their tools process over 2 million minutes of audio every single day. They can process yours. Visit music.ai to get started.
Wonderful tools, I will say from experience. Hey, we're also sponsored in part by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform that makes it easy to build a stunning website and online store for your music in minutes. All the features you need are already built in, including dozens of fully customizable templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free crowdfunding and fan subscription features, mailing list tools to grow your fan list, integrations with Bandcamp, SoundCloud, YouTube, Bands in Town, and more, so you can easily add content from your other online profiles, plus live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Website plans start at just $8.29 a month, which includes hosting and your own free custom domain name. Your Morning Coffee podcast listeners can go over to bandzoogle.com to try it free for 30 days and use promo code Morning Coffee. That's all one word to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Morning Coffee.
Right, and we're also sponsored by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. Edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla, Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
You bet. Bands in Town. Over 90 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform connecting over 590,000 artists with their super fans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms. And I think that number has actually gone up, those I recall.
Yeah, now it's
hasn't it, Jay?
650,000.
650,000 artists. That is, how can there be that many artists? That's unbelievable.
That's crazy.
Hey, and every week I get to hang out with this guy right here. He is the biggest Minnesota Vikings fan I know. He is Jay Gilbert. He's a music industry consultant. He is the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups, and a member of American Airlines. You get to go into the cool place when you travel, don't you? In the lounge.
All the cool places. I get to do this show every week with my good friend Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Group. And we typically get on for a while before we hit record and talk about books we've read or documentaries or things we've eaten. And we were talking a little bit about that Beatles documentary that just came out last Friday called Beatles 64. And it's good. It's not great. It's got a really amazing interview with Jack Douglas, which is worth the price of admission right there, and a really cool interview with Paul McCartney. But a lot of that footage you can see from, the Beatles' first U.S. visit. What I did during the holiday, which was really nice, was I rewatched Hard Day's Night. And man, that just never gets, I think I have that movie memorized. It's just so funny.
And so well done, and you forget how impactful it was. And we've talked about this a lot too. If you grew up in the current era, or let's just say the internet era, you have access to see everything. When we were certainly young kids, it was so rare that you could see actual footage of artists.
Yeah.
And so when you would go to the movies and see a movie like Hard Day's Night or Yellow Submarine or any of those kind of documentaries, or I used to go to midnight movies and see whatever documentary music thing was out or concert footage, and it was just revelatory. You're just like, oh my God, that's what they look like.
Did you ever watch Don Kirshner's rock concert or the Midnight Special or some of these?
Special, yeah.
That was some of the only times that we could actually see artists move. Like we saw photos of them. I remember it was my first concert. It was Cheap Trick opening up for Kiss. And I had never seen either one of them move. I didn't see the Paul Lynde special for years after that. And there wasn't MTV, there wasn't YouTube, there wasn't, the World Wide Web. So when you saw them live, it was crazy. We'd go see like David Bowie and Alice Cooper and some of these bands. You were just shocked. You were blown away because you'd never seen anything like that. Today, you can kind of see what they had for breakfast. It takes a little bit of that scarcity out of it.
It does. It does. Speaking of Midnight Special, on YouTube, whoever owns the rights to the Midnight Special, and this was a show that was started in the early 70s and went through the early 80s. And it was almost all of it was live. Occasionally, they would show like a music video.
Mostly live, yeah.
Yeah, an international act. But whoever owns the rights has cleaned up a lot of the footage, and they're releasing it on YouTube, and it is just stunning to watch, and to hear these live versions replicated so darn well. Again, no tricks, no nothing. This was the 70s and 80s where you were playing live for reals, and it's
good
fun
stuff.
to see that. Yeah, good to see that. Our next story, Jay, is from Hypebot by Chris Robley from Reverb Nation. How to identify botted playlists and protect your music. If your music's getting botted, your music could get booted. Yes, tracks and playlists with inflated streams, also known as streaming fraud, run the risk of being removed from platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. And you run this risk whether or not you knowingly engage in bad behavior.
Right. And for those that don't know, we talk about bots and spin farms a lot. Bots, that's just simply a piece of software that sort of mimics human behavior by playing a song over and over again. And a spin farm is just basically a room full of hundreds of devices that play a song over and over and over again. And some of these fraudsters are getting, pretty savvy at the way they're doing some of these things. But as Chris points out here, there are ways to tell if you're being quote unquote botted. For instance, if you enlist a promotion company who inflates your streams, or if your song ends up on a botted playlist, you could see your track, your catalog, your entire user account, or your artist profile deleted from the very platforms you rely on to share your music with the world.
So you may ask, how do I avoid getting my tracks removed? Well, they wrote an article about streaming fraud, what it is, why it happens, how it negatively impacts all artists and labels, and how you can avoid the fallout.
Right. Chris recommends that you read these tips, but there was one area that required a bit more detail: how to know if a particular playlist has inflated streams so you can steer clear. Here's how to avoid botted playlists. Quote unquote, is this playlist going to hurt or help me? There are a handful of things to look for that may indicate third-party playlist has been created for purposes outside of authentic human engagement.
Right. So suspicious playlists might exist too. Let's talk about this. How about house tracks by artists who paid to have their stream counts inflated? Gather tracks by artists who paid for placement despite the playlist having no genuine listener interest, and assemble a catalog of potentially problematic tracks such as AI-generated audio, functional noise, music by fake artists, and carbon copies, which is, of course, copyright infringement.
Right. Chris writes that you only have so many minutes in your day. If you're pitching your music to playlists, you want to make that time be worth the effort. So there are a number of things that you can do to check, beforehand to see if a playlist is legit or suspicious.
So some of these things are publicly and instantly viewable, and some of them require you to access certain data through a service like Chartmetric or Artist.tools, or at the very least, to do some deeper analysis on your own.
So how do you spot botted playlists? The more obvious red flags include bad or no branding. Legit playlists care about their listener experience, and that means they've probably put in some work to, not just list the tracks, but also the playlist cover artwork and profile artwork and descriptions. If a playlist looks shoddy or neglected, you should probably avoid it.
How about if it has a mysterious user profile? Does the playlist curator seem like a real person? Cool. If not, beware. What about no other internet presence? Lots of serious curators will have a social profile and or website to share the list they're proud of. If they don't, why are they hiding?
Right. And watch out for fishy follower names. You can view the followers of the user account who created the playlist. Scroll through it. If you see mostly numbers and squiggles and smashes, beware. Lots of unknown artists, something to look out for. There isn't to say there aren't music fans out there who genuinely love obscure artists, but watch out for unknown artists on these playlists.
Right. But to be honest, most playlists are going to contain some artists who are, if not famous, at least notable within their subgenres. So lots of famous artists plus one or two unknowns. Why would those obscure tracks be welcome in a list populated almost entirely by bigger songs? Sounds kind of fishy.
It sure does. And you have to watch out for, lots of random tracks that don't fit the theme or genre. Imagine a playlist with no recognizable vibe or organizing principle. Who would listen to a playlist like that? Not humans, bots.
No, check out for pay for placement. Someone who asks you to pay to get your track on their playlist clearly has different incentives than sharing their favorite music. You got to ask yourself why.
Right. Watch out for paid playlist promotion. This is a big one. If you've enlisted a company or a promoter to get your track on a playlist, you better be damn sure that they've vetted a list of legit curators.
Because the more common occurrence, sadly, is that these promo companies are scams, guaranteeing results and then using fraudulent tactics like bots to deliver the results. Tragically, the final result may be your music's removal from streaming platforms.
Yeah, and sadly, we've seen this. The other thing to watch out for are submission gates. If someone forces you to follow a playlist before you can submit a track, they're artificially inflating the appearance of interest. That doesn't necessarily equate to botted streams, but it's a warning sign that the playlist isn't really worth your time. The follower count doesn't matter. It's how many humans are actually listening to that playlist.
Right, and you may see random fans also like recommendations. This one may take a bit of digging on your part, but check out the artists who are featured on a particular playlist. Look at their Spotify profiles and see if the other artists mentioned in the fans also like section are actually similar. If not, they may be artificially inflating their streams by appearing in botted playlists with dissimilar music.
Another thing to look out for are incredible save rates. This may sound counterintuitive since bots are essentially disengaged listeners, and you might think that a great save rate shows true enjoyment. But here's the thing. If your song is on a playlist that's driving amazing streaming and save results, it might be fishy. Because after all, your song is on a playlist, which by design is a more passive listening experience. So if those save rates seem too good to be true, it might be an indication that a sophisticated bot farm is clicking that save button too.
What about if the stream per listener rate is too high? If your song is on a list that's driving lots of streams, but not increasing the listeners in reasonable proportion, your track could be getting looped. An average new fan might love your song and listen another 1 to 3 times, but they're not going to listen 15 times. Warning signs that require data analysis. What about big spikes or declines in playlist metrics? Does the follower count or streaming activity jump and dip quickly? Might be sketchy. Genuine playlists usually grow more slowly and consistently.
Yeah, that's right. And a few other things that Chris writes about. One is poor engagement, on these tracks. If the tracks on a playlist have big play counts but small save ratios, or the artists themselves have few followers, that might be a warning sign. It could also be that the track performs well in passive listening situations, Spotify radio, for example, without leading to deep engagement, but that's probably an exception to the rule.
Here's another thing to watch out for: weird top countries and cities. He says, I'm not saying the countries or cities are weird. I'm saying it's weird that the tracks on the playlist suddenly skyrocket in a random place where the genre isn't popular or the artists don't tour, don't market, and don't have existing traction.
Yeah, that's a big one. Look out for oddly weighted geographic listening. If most of the streaming activity for a particular song or artist are coming from one place that really isn't the artist's hometown, watch out. I'm sure if it's still true, but for a while, Buffalo, New York was showing up as a common location for bot activity.
Now, you can avoid problematic playlists. Streaming fraud and botted playlists have become such a common problem that platforms are really cracking down. That's why it's so important to make sure your music and career aren't damaged by the fallout.
Right. And finally, Chris writes that knowing how to tell the difference between legit and botted playlists is crucial. And while this article probably doesn't include every possible indicator of bad behavior, it's enough to get you started in your own playlist investigation.
Right. Here's hoping you find some great playlists with engaged listeners and a passionate curator who shares music for the right reasons. When you do, check out these tips on making a great playlist pitch from Chris. And you know what? I mean, listen, it is a total pain in the ass to have to go through all of this stuff, but that is just the reality. And we've seen people that just get caught up in it inadvertently, and boom, their stuff's down. And that is devastating.
It is. And Chris is great. I've spoken to Chris. You know, not only is he a music industry pro, but he's also a singer-songwriter and has written some really great songs that you can find on your DSP of choice, Chris Robley, Robley. Really great stuff. Always look forward to his insightful articles, and this was no different. Great job.
Yes, indeed. Well, listen, if you enjoy the show, Jay and I would certainly appreciate it. Just tell one friend. And then we're going to be back, of course, next week. So big thanks to the MLC, Soundtrack, Bandzoogle, Music.ai, Hypebot, and Bands in Town for their continued support. We really appreciate it. So on behalf of Jay Gilbert, my very good friend, I'm Mike Etchart, and I say thanks for listening. We'll be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.